Hey there, it's Kat Kinsman, Executive Features Editor at Food & Wine, and this fall, we're launching the new Food & Wine Classic in Charleston with our partners at Southern Living and Travel + Leisure, and we want to see you there. Join us September 27th through the 29th to learn from iconic chefs, share a glass with innovative wine experts, and experience Charleston with one-of-a-kind events. Tickets are on sale now at foodandwine.com/Charleston Classic. That's foodandwine.com/Charleston Classic. See you down in Charleston.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
Westholme is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
Culture and Flavor is a podcast about food and culture centered in Black and Indigenous foodways. Hosted by myself, Zella Palmer, right here in New Orleans, Louisiana. Each episode features high vibrational conversations with cultural bearers, chefs, farmers, scholars, barbecue pitmasters, and more. Where there is flavor, there is history. Join me on Culture and Flavor and all of my guests as we share stories that will have you praise dancing, cooking, conjuring, and inspiring your culinary journey. Welcome to another episode of Culture and Flavor with your host, Zella Palmer. Today we have Dr. David Katerere on Culture and Flavor. He has a PhD in pharmaceutical science from University of Strathclyde in the UK. He's originally from Zimbabwe, where he received his Bachelor of Pharmacy, but now he lives in Pretoria, South Africa, where he is a university and research professor. We met at the 22nd Annual Botanicals Conference at Ole Miss in Oxford, Mississippi recently, and I was so just honored to speak and present on the Afro-Caribbean panel, where there were other scholars from Jamaica, Barbados, even from Australia, Denzel Phillip, who is well known. I was so honored to be a part of that and just to learn about everyone's research. Particularly what struck me was some of the research that was shared about their research in indigenous and medicine during slavery and colonization, where some chemists were able to extract compounds to create medicinal plants, medicine that would actually help upper respiratory illnesses. Even there was a professor from University of West Indies who did research on the colonization of botanical gardens and how they were systems of oppression. But then she fast forwarded and was able to research African botanical gardens during slavery. So it was such a rich conference. It was such a rich conference, and I was so honored to present my research about Afro-Caribbean influences on the American Southern cuisine and culture, which was super exciting. And then I'm sitting at the table during lunch, and Dr. David Katerere, he talked about, why aren't we talking about him? And he started talking about his medicine, that he had some research and work that he was working on, where he gave me this moringa tablet that literally turned my water into sweet tea. It tastes like sweet tea, and then he gave me something else, another herbal supplement, which helps with lowering your blood pressure, lowering your cholesterol, your libido even. I mean, it was exciting to sit next to all of these chemists and scientists and feel their passion. And it's also exciting to know that there are Black folks in science who are working hard to bring indigenous medicine back. And he also shared with me some of the books that he has either co-wrote or published. One in particular, African Herbal Pharmacopoeia. Another one, Traditional and Indigenous Knowledge for the Modern Era, a Natural and Applied Science Perspective. So I want to give a special welcome to my new friend, Dr. David Katerere. Welcome.
Thank you, Zella. I'm really honored to be here. And it was really great to meet you. And I have great memories of that meeting in Mississippi.
It was beautiful. It was a beautiful meeting, and I was really impressed by some of the work that you're doing. Let's talk about your journey. I remember sitting with you, and you talked about how you were, born and raised in Zimbabwe, and then you moved to South Africa. And I would love to just talk about your journey and your interest in indigenous knowledge and traditional medicine and bringing it to the masses.
Yeah, so I tell people I'm a village boy, right? So good things come from the village. So I was born in the village in then Rhodesia, actually, in the middle of the war. As you may know, there was a war in Zimbabwe, quite a brutal one, which Bob Marley actually captures in his song Zimbabwe. And so I was born there, and I was a sickly child. And you can imagine that in a war zone, you don't really have access to medicines. It's very difficult to travel to clinics. And so my grandmother on my mother's side was actually a traditional birth attendant, very successful one who actually became formalized after independence. And my grandmother on my father's side, my paternal grandmother, whom I never met, was a traditional healer. So in a sense, and I say this to a lot of people who are in the healing professions, whether they're in pharmacy, nursing, medicine, that it's a calling, right, that you can't run away from, and it's there in your ancestral line. So I always had this interest, and also growing up and being treated a lot by traditional medicines has actually informed of that interest at a very early stage. Then moved to Harare, went into pharmacy school, and the thing that I wanted to do in pharmacy was always to make stuff. So that's what captivated me. It wasn't really, talking to patients. When I went into the lab and I saw that they were making stuff that I'd grown up drinking, like children's cough mixture, that really excited me. And I was like, okay, it's people like us who make this stuff. And then in my final year, I was introduced to a professor. She was Welsh, but she was very interested in traditional medicine because, as you may know, the Welsh also quite imbued or use traditional medicine. In the UK, it's mostly the Welsh and then to some extent the Scottish. Yeah, so I worked then on a plant called Heteromorpha trifoliata, which is used for ulcer, peptic ulcers, and did some very interesting work. So it became my first publication. Then afterwards worked in communities, community pharmacy, hospital pharmacy. And then in 97, I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship. And I went to Strathclyde, which is a kind of maker for phytochemistry, natural products. So I was really, really lucky in that sense. And sort of halfway through my studies, my supervisor left. So I, in a sense, had the opportunity to then take up a new project. And I was feeling a little bit stuck. Then there's a book that I had taken with me from Zimbabwe, which was a conference proceeding of a conference that had happened the year before, so in 1996. And I started just leafing through this book, and I came across the story of Combretaceae. So the Combretaceae is a botanical family with over 400 species, most of them in Africa, some in South America, and actually in Indian Ayurvedic medicine, Terminalia arjuna is considered almost a holy herb. It's used for heart conditions. And reading through this, I realized that one of these herbs was something that we had actually, or had been used on me, and that it grew at my grandmother's homestead. So I packed up my bags and went to Zimbabwe and collected these plants, and then went back to Scotland and worked on these plants. And Combretaceae is a very interesting family of plants. And in fact, back in the 1970s, the National Cancer Institute in the US had actually also worked on this family of plants and sort of found a compound that had unique anti-cancer activity. So there were lots of very interesting things that came about as a result. Then I wanted to come back. You can't quite stay in Scotland. It's cold. It's gloomy. It's yeah, nice place though. But hey, I'm very African at my core. I love my sun. Yeah. I want to see the sunshine every day. I like African food. And yeah, so I came back, and part of it was just to really spend time with my elderly father then, and we did before he passed on. So we had great times because he had been quite instrumental in my PhD in taking me around plant hunting back in those days when I needed to do those things, and really shaped my or influenced a lot of my career in that sense. Yeah, so then joined the University of Pretoria, where I was exposed to medicinal plants for animals, right? Ethno-veterinary plants. So that's another area of specialization. And in fact, I ended up editing a book around ethno-veterinary medicines or ethno-veterinary botanical medicines, because what mankind uses to treat his or her disease, humankind uses to also treat animals, companion animals, or production animals. So we do that a lot. And then about 12 years ago, I joined Tshwane University of Technology, and I have a research area which is really around product development using indigenous plants for medicines or dietary, food plants. So that's what we've been working a lot on, because the way you preserve knowledge is really by making it commercially viable. So people find that there's greater value in that. And, so that's what I've been working on. I work with traditional healers. We try to help them also to, commercialize their products, to formalize their practices. Yeah.
I was recently, we had on the show, Chef Kudzai Binge Pinge. He's actually from Zimbabwe, but he's also has an artisanal salt company called Noom. And he was talking about a lot about what you're talking about indigenous medicine, plant medicine, but putting it on the plate. And if we can figure out how, like you said, to develop it and put it on shelves and make it available for the masses, we'll probably have less, diseases. And which was fascinating to me when I think about during COVID, everyone was afraid of COVID hitting Africa. But the reality of it was that it showed how sick the U.S. is as far as our availability to anything that has to, with plant medicine. We're so dependent on pharmaceutical drugs, chemicals, all of these things. It's in our food, it's in our air, it's taken over a lot, and there isn't enough research. And I remember us talking, you and I, about hemp, and it wasn't until 2018 that hemp became legal in the U.S., right? So been a fear and smear campaign for so long about anything. And even, thinking about your grandmother who was a doula, and was able to get legal in Zimbabwe. I mean, Black women historically and indigenous women were doulas until Western medicine said, oh, no, you need to get these licenses to be approved. But, during slavery and colonization, it was Black and indigenous women who were helping everyone, So I would love for you to talk about maybe some of your research and some of the products that you are working on, or something, or that you're most passionate about, I should say.
I'm passionate about everything. So maybe let's start with Kudzai, right? It's interesting because about 3 weeks ago, I think it's called their restaurant in
Crow.
It was featured in one of the newspapers here. And I was really so, and then I made a mental note to say, hey, I need to go to this restaurant because, so one of the things that we actually made and is on the market is a sorghum-based beverage right? So sorghum, as you may know, is an indigenous grain in Africa. And in fact,
Absolutely.
yeah, and in fact, last year was the United Nations Year of Millet and Sorghum. And that tells you just how important the millets and sorghum are. And all of them really originate from Africa, right? They are climate smart, which is to say that they don't need a lot of water. They can withstand a lot of heat. So increasingly, as we think about a global warming, we have to turn to these indigenous grains, right? And they're GMO because thank God that they're not so commercial to have attracted the commercial interests of the big grain seed companies, right? So, and the thing is, in the US, sorghum is grown in Nebraska for animals, but in Africa, we grow sorghum to consume it, to drink it as alcohol, to drink it as non-alcoholic drinks. It's got very high protein. It's got really good iron, which again, iron deficiency anemia affects a lot of Black women actually. And so including these things, the brown grains in people's diets is very important. The other thing is that it's low glycemic index, right? Which means that it gets absorbed slowly. So it's really good at more sugar absorption, right? And therefore modulating weight. Right. So there's many things to be said about this. And in 2018, we actually got an innovation grant from the South African and Finnish governments to develop a product. And then we developed this product, which is indigenous. People know it, but then we added a little bit of additional innovation, which is then to ferment the product using probiotics. So it's a non-dairy drinking yogurt. That's what we call it, but very healthy because it combines, the fermentation, or if you like, the advantages of fermented foods. So that's like a whole different discussion we can have. Fermentation is the first technology that Africa invents and gives to the world. Because, before spices, you had to preserve things. How did you preserve them? You did that by fermenting them, right? And then, so we combine this with this sorghum into this drink, and very popular here with students. It's a meal on the go. And therefore, that's why Kudzai, when I saw that he's got this indigenous facing restaurant with indigenous cuisine, I was really like, I need to go and see this guy and get him to stock our product. Yeah, so you should introduce me to him.
I will. I'll definitely introduce them.
Yeah. So that's kind of one of our major research areas. And in fact, recently we got funding for us to test this product in the mining industry. Because, in the mining industry, they have diabetic issues. I mean, diabetes is a problem everywhere. But the problem with the mining industry is that if you're employed to go underground and you're not able to go underground because your diabetes is uncontrolled or you're a bit on the obese side, they actually don't get paid. So no work, no pay. Right. So so we are actually going to be doing a nutrition clinical study using this product. And I'm really interested in introducing this product in the US, because it's an organic product. It would be good for people who are just having issues, with diet and of course with, trying to manage weight. So that's one of the things that, I was also interested in talking to people about over there. Then other research pathways or areas that we are looking at. So mushrooms, right? And not the smoking mushrooms or the psychedelic mushrooms, but indigenous dietary mushrooms. We know that Africa has a lot more mushrooms, probably a diverse species of mushrooms than anywhere else in the world, but we've not actually commercialized these or even identified them. People sell mushrooms in villages. It's a source of income, but it's got very good dietary fiber. It's good for weight management. It's good for diabetes as well. So, diseases of lifestyle, as we call them. So, one of the areas that we're looking at is number one, training communities to grow mushrooms. Because you don't need land to grow mushrooms. You actually need a garage or a cupboard, so you can actually grow your own mushrooms. Within 21 days, you're harvesting and eating mushrooms. The initial investment is very small, right? And it's suited for young people. It's suited for women because you don't need a lot of machinery. You're not lifting anything really to grow mushrooms. So one of the projects we have is looking at indigenous mushrooms, looking at ways of cultivating them, right? And then looking at what products, apart from eating them, what products can you actually make from mushrooms? So cosmetic products. So we've got students looking at cosmetic use of mushrooms. We have students looking at medicinal uses of mushrooms. So that's another area. And then you and I think, Zella, we talked about hemp and cannabis, which is not an indigenous African herb. So it comes from, Asia, India, China, comes with the Arab traders into the east coast of Africa. And somehow the first place where it's smoked is in Africa, right? But it's smoked for religious reasons, for spiritual reasons, right? And then, of course, with the slave trade, it moves from Africa into the Americas. And, there are stories about how one of these slave masters, if we should call them that, sees that, people taking a drink, some of the enslaved people drinking in the morning, and they can go through the day with quite a bit of energy and not too much anxiety, and of course we know that, slave caused a lot of mental health issues, depression, anxiety, all of those things. And somehow people were able to cope using herbs that were familiar to them, that they'd actually smuggled on ships and taken across. And at the conference, we talked a lot about aloe vera, and how it actually comes from Africa, the Middle East, into the Americas. Yeah, so that's one of the other projects. And then we have this African Herbal Pharmacopoeia that's really aimed at documenting articles of trade. So in other words, what are the possible ingredients, or what are the ingredients that companies can use from Africa, and are they standardized? What do we know about these ingredients in terms of identifying them, in terms of the chemistry of these ingredients, and also in terms of the use of these ingredients? So the African Herbal Pharmacopoeia was first published in 2009, and it focused on 50 commercially viable plant species from Africa. So this is the second iteration, and this time we've kind of pared it down to 30, but we've put a lot more information. And some of the plant species, you'll get the new ones, shea. So we've put in the plant that gives us shea butter. We've put in moringa, which is not typically African, but has been naturalized in Africa. We also have mesembrine, and so quite a lot of other products that would be of interest and that can be standardized for trade.
And one of the herbs that you gave me,
Mondia, yes.
I was fascinated by that. I still have some, actually.
How's it going for you, Zella?
It's going well. I was just fascinated by the moringa tablet because, it was, y'all, for the listeners, it's a white tablet that he gave me. And I just have to say, chemists, agronomists, all, scholars, we're the coolest people ever. We're always like creating something, and we're just like, it's like tell. So to be at this conference. It was so much fun. And David gave me a white tablet. He said, I want you to try this. And I put it underneath my tongue. He was like, let it sit in your mouth for 5 minutes. Now go get some water. And I said, okay. So I drank the water and my eyes just lit up because I said, wow, this tastes like sweet tea. This is amazing. Yeah. I was thinking about just all the elders that I know in our communities and, how they could benefit for something like this to take away the medicinal, the mineral kind of irony taste in medicine. Yes, metallic. Yeah. Thank you. Metallic, and I was so fascinated by that. But I was thinking when you were talking about sorghum, and sorghum is definitely an African crop that was brought to the U.S. during slavery, and there is a tribe, and a Native American tribe in Sampson County in North Carolina, the Katerere tribe of North Carolina, and they have a sorghum festival every year. And Mr. Greg Jacobs, who is their tribal chairman, he gave me some of his sorghum syrup, and I cherish it. It's in my cabinet. I take it out sometimes and I made little cookies and things of that nature. It's so sad, when a lot of our American heroes, our scholars and scientists, particularly who are African American, are denigrated or, deleted to just a little footnote in history, and he just becomes the peanut man. But he was so much more. His research, when I think about the Ford plant, how George Washington Carver was able to give a lot of his research to the American government, including Henry Ford and the production of American cars. He has so much research. And now all of his patents, his research is now, part of the U.S. government. They own it, basically, and he was doing research on sorghum, peanut oil. I mean, he helped with polio. He did so much, and he was just a brilliant man. And so, to hear you talk about sorghum is so refreshing, considering, just what we talked about, how hemp was seen as, this demonic plant, or, and then the campaign, the marketing campaign and the propaganda so that plastic could become the number one product, or cotton could be the number one product.
Yes, all of those things. Yeah.
So, I'm excited to hear you talk more about hemp and some of the medicinal plants that Africa has to offer. Because some of those plants we actually have in the U.S. and the Caribbean, but we just need to bring them back. And to have you at the forefront of this research is profound.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be very keen to actually, meet with, like you were saying, the indigenous group that is involved with sorghum, because of course, for us in Africa, when we on the traditional side, when we communicate with ancestors, right, we always use sorghum and millets. And we brew those, so there's actually a protocol of brewing, sorghum over 7 days. It's actually called the 7-day brew, so you would brew it over 7 days and then leading up to a festival. So it's a rainmaking festival, or it's maybe a festival of remembrance. Like normally that happens a year after somebody has died, and you're trying to now call their spirit back into the home. So sorghum beer is always a part of these festivals. So it's actually very important. But also in nutrition, on a daily basis, people would make sorghum porridge. Right? Sometimes they would ferment it overnight, and the fermentation process releases more nutrients. So certainly, sorghum is a very, very critical part of who we are as Black people. And, some of these problems come about because of genetic changes. So increasingly there's research which says that, the food that you eat is very genetic. It interacts with your body in a genetic way. So, for instance, there are studies where they've taken Japanese, from Okinawa, which is an island where they actually they live very long. They don't have a lot of heart diseases or cardiovascular diseases. And when you take this cohort of people and put them into the US, so into, say, New York, something happens because now they're not eating the food that matches with who they are, right? So they would find that suddenly you're getting heart conditions, cardiovascular diseases in that population. And so it's kind of the same with us, right? When you take us and transplant us into your Western diets, then surely things are going to happen that are negative. And that is why we really need to be thinking about, okay, what are the foods that are maybe healthy and that we should use? And I know that there's this whole plant-based diet thing. Africans have been plant-based diets forever, right? Sometimes not quite out of choice, but it's kept us healthy in a sense. And those are some of the conversations that we need to start having in our communities to say, and growing sorghum is not such a difficult thing. So, that we can definitely look at. And then with the mondia. So mondia is by and large an aphrodisiac, right? But what we are finding is that it's not just an aphrodisiac for men, it's also an aphrodisiac for women. And maybe it's because of the mood-enhancing effects that it has, right? And in addition to that, for men, there's literature that actually shows that it increases testosterone. So there's all this research, and it's also used as a flavoring. So I like, even though we encapsulate it so that at least it's a good dose to have. You can move around with it nicely. But actually, I prefer to take it in its raw form because you can put it into water again, and it just enhances the flavor of the water. Mm-hmm. And then when we talked about moringa, so that's actually not a prepared tablet that I gave you. That is just a part of moringa. So it's natural, it's organic, no additives at all there. And what I like about that product is that we use it to encourage, especially older folk that you talked about, we use it to encourage them to drink water. So my mother uses it, and because when your mouth is sweet, you tend then to want, you have a thirst, and you then want to drink more water. And as you know, not drinking water is probably one of the biggest killers for old people. They just get dehydrated.
And some of them, they not only get dehydrated, but they're afraid to drink because then they'll have to go to the bathroom, especially in the States. I'm thinking about when I lost my parents and they couldn't move anymore. The pride of my father, who, is Air Force man, former policeman, he wanted to get up, but he couldn't, it was always a struggle for him. Yes. So I think that also kind of, scares them sometimes away from drinking water. But we will be back after a few messages from our advertisers. This has been an enlightening conversation. I'm so excited to have David here on Culture and Flavor, and we'll be back after a few messages.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything, especially when it comes to beef. In Northern Australia, there's a different approach to raising high-quality beef. Westholme, based in Queensland and Northern Territory, is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme stewards 16 million acres of rangeland guided by their natural ecosystem. They're led by a belief that if they balance the needs of their cattle with the needs of the environment, both can thrive. Westholme's team of rangeland experts and nature managers use a variety of tools to monitor and respond to the welfare of the environment, like satellites that assess grass health and on-the-ground research. Cattle are happier when they have the freedom to forage and explore, so West Home ensures that they can roam wild, foraging at will for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. Their cows graze on native grasses like Mitchell grass, which is only found in Australia, along with dozens of other plants, herbs, and seasonal legumes. The result is a high-quality Wagyu beef that reflects the terroir of Northern Australia and a flavor suited to complement any cuisine. West Home believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westhome.com.
Okay, we're back. So I wanted to pivot the conversation just about how do we get more information about, I know that you have a couple of books out that talks about traditional and indigenous knowledge and particularly is it in Southern Africa that the book about, or is it also Western and Central Africa as a whole continent? Because the continent is huge, right? So is it specific to different tribes?
Yeah. So look, all of these books, we always, contributors from across the world, actually. So you'll find that this book is interesting because we have contributors actually from the Caribbean, and I was really, really fascinated to read about the history of the Caribbean, particularly Jamaica, and how Jamaican medicines are now influencing the culture in New York. We also have a very sort of angry chapter from India, which sort of rails against what the British destroyed. And then, we have somebody who's worked quite a bit in Kenya. So they are not, the chapters are not really specific to countries, but more to actors, right? So if you're talking about food, if you're talking about traditional healers and how they can be mainstreamed into formal health sector. We also have a chapter actually from Japan, which talks about Kampo medicine. So that's now in the book. So we really tried to locate the importance of traditional and indigenous knowledge in the modern era, and when you start to look at it, when you start to do that, you will find that, we continue to be indigenous, we continue to be traditional, even though we might not know it, we might not acknowledge it. And a good example, and there's a little chapter there on traditional leadership, right? And one of the things that emerges from that is the majority of countries in Europe are actually led by traditional healers. We call them nobles or kings, or, King Charles. King Charles is a traditional healer, leader rather, because you can trace his ancestry, almost 1,500 years going back. Right. And that brought stability because he's a religious leader. He's a spiritual leader. In the old days, he would also have been a healthcare leader,
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And it's interesting to me because now, talking about aphrodisiacs, some of my Nigerian friends, showed me some Instagram pages particularly of this one businesswoman. She's from the northern part of Nigeria, and she has built a huge empire on selling kayamata, which is an aphrodisiac from the kola nut that basically helps women with their own, aphrodisiac parts, if I can say.
Yes,
and she's made a killing off of it. And, and it's interesting to see, how social media is being used as well as a tool to get information out, because for quite some time, us in the US, or even I'm sure in Europe, if we are not connected to the continent, if we're not connected to the Caribbean, we don't know how to heal ourselves anymore, because we're about 2 generations that memory, that cultural memory has been completely wiped out, where we're dependent on pharmaceutical drugs, food that you can get at the supermarket. We don't grow our own food anymore. I mean, it's so much, that damage that has been done, since the since the 40s or 50s, and let's go back to slavery, and native genocide. But when you see social media, and especially during the pandemic, I always tell this story. I'll never forget being in Walmart and I was stocking up on food, walking in with 3 masks and, my face covered. And I can remember seeing in the vitamin section, it was, that was the first time I've seen people united. I mean, there was different, ethnic backgrounds, different races, different ages, and everybody was trying to get an echinacea tablet or elderberry.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And they're like, and they're sharing information with each other, and all of a sudden everybody's a doctor, So having this conversation with you was refreshing. Having the conversation with Denzel, those who are in the Caribbean at University of West Indies, as well as University of Barbados, and all of the work that they're doing in the Caribbean, because like I said in my presentation, the Botanica, the the bookstore, or in Harlem at the tables, where it was a Jamaican healer or a Caribbean healer, we still need that. We still need the roots and sea moss and all the products that have been sold in our communities, because we have to heal ourselves, where our diabetes is skyrocketing. And I'm sure it's entering into Africa as well, because of the products that we're bringing. And it starts out slow, where you just remove, some seasoning that was indigenous or a herb that you used to use. And now, look, we have this product that you can substitute. And then you look at the ingredients and it's nothing that your grandmother would use, And then before you know it, your whole diet, your whole plate isn't even real.
Yeah. So I think you make a very interesting point. But one of the things that we also need to challenge ourselves, right, is what are we growing? Because, we have little spaces. Even if you're going to grow, I don't know, basil in a box. So my experience of sort of, South Africa going into the townships, or last time I was in the US, even now, maybe being in DC, in Black neighborhoods, is that we are really not growing anything. And yet we could. We could grow small things. So if you're going to grow a few tomatoes or onions at home, do that. Substitute things that you could get from the supermarket with stuff that you could grow in your own home, so that we reduce this thing of food deserts. Right. And of course, it's also exercise. Working in a garden is exercise. And the other interesting thing is there are lots of weeds that are edible, that if you really put your mind to it, you can find quite easily, like the amaranthus, for instance. And these are things. And I have a garden here at home, and I tell the people who work in my garden that they shouldn't touch the weeds, So blackjack. Blackjack is actually really good. You would have blackjack in the US? I'm not sure.
I think we do. I have to double check that.
Yeah. But blackjack is good to eat, but it's also really good for controlling. You can make a tea from that, which controls high blood pressure and sometimes just assists with, sugar levels and things like that. So I think that's where we need to be also thinking, to say, hey, as communities, how can we come together, exchange this information, but also make sure that this information actually is translated into some action of some sort. So the urban garden culture you find is there in many of the poorer African countries, right? But the minute that we get a little bit of money, like in South Africa, we then think that buying stuff in the supermarket is the thing to do. Yeah, and yet it isn't. When I was in the US, I was saying, if you go to, what's that supermarket?
Whole Foods.
Whole Foods, you're actually likely to get sorghum there, right? But in Africa, if you go to most households, they don't want to eat sorghum because, it's associated with poor people. They want to be eating white maize. which is not very good at all. Yeah. So I think if we think back about the foods that we were eating when we were not so rich, that our grandparents were probably eating, then that might be a good starting point of coming up with, good dietary plans. Yeah.
Well, we want to continue to support your work. How can we support your work? And I will definitely make sure that our listeners have the links on our page, just so they can possibly purchase one of your books. It's just exciting information. I've learned so much. I hope my listeners have too. And this is just the beginning of many conversations that I'm looking
definitely.
forward to having.
Yeah. So we have a YouTube channel where listeners can go to learn a lot about, all the stuff that's happening in Africa around natural products, also botanical safety, because people always say, it's safe, it's natural, but it's not. You have to know what you're getting. So it's important that in this conversation, we also say that, you shouldn't just be buying stuff online and saying, oh, it says Mondia, therefore it is Mondia, because it can hurt you. So botanical safety is important, and that's captured in the websites and the YouTube channels. And then, I'm really, really interested in trying to bring some of these products, particularly the sorghum-based products and the moringa-based products into the US, because these are things that we spent a lot of time and resources researching. So we kind of know how to do this. But the reason why I'm interested in bringing these to the US is really because we are saving our own lives, because I think that there's really an important place where African ingredients can be important in improving nutrition outcomes in the US, but also in improving health outcomes, particularly in African American and indigenous communities.
Powerful. Thank you so much for being a guest on Culture and Flavor. And I look forward to many more conversations and seeing you at other conferences.
Yes.
And we will definitely be in touch afterwards again. And I thank for introducing us. It was a beautiful conference. So thank you for joining me on Culture and Flavor. And I know that you just arrived back from the U.S. back in South Africa. So thank you for taking the time.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much, Dr. Palmer. And I look forward to future engagements. I've started sharing your podcast I was sharing it with people at Spelman and quite a lot of other my friends in the US, because I really think that this platform that you've created is an important platform for our communities.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, great success with this. And I'm always happy to maybe introduce you to other interesting people that you can talk to on the continent and else.
I'm passionate about plant medicine. I loved reading about George Washington Carver. My grandmother actually told me stories of growing up on Tuskegee's campus and sitting on George Washington Carver's lap.
Wow, that's
so
interesting.
That means a lot to me. And I'm doing my best to get the word out, connect people, because we have to heal our communities. And it's at this point, it's not even, it's across the world that we're going through this. We have to heal ourselves as human beings, because we're at a dangerous place.
Yeah, so you're definitely not alone in that. I think that there are many people like us, and we should, have these conversations and discussions and see how we can actually, influence policies, how we can move things forward. And Indeed. Like I said, Indeed. It's, we are saving our own lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for joining Culture and Flavor, everyone. It was a pleasure, and we will see you on the next episode.
Culture and Flavor is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org.